Hello everyone and welcome back to the Football Forecast, and today's we're going for my Premier League Roundup for Game Week 22, and where I want to start is the title race where all three sides drop points, and Arsenal drew to Forest away from home, but have probably come out the best out of all sides. In fact, they have come out the best out of all sides. They have gained 1 point on the Aston Villa and City despite dropping points, and they were alright in their game against Forest, a 0-0 draw. There's nothing really to talk about because it was a 0-0 draw. There was some controversy, but I'm going to talk about that later. And an individual performance, though, I did want to talk about in this game was Victor Gyökeres. He was nowhere near good enough for Arsenal once again, and he's proven why he can't be Arsenal's number 9. Because in that moment, when he was one-on-one, he should have been one-on-one with the Forest keeper, but he was too slow in transition. It's those sort of moments where you actually think Gyökeres should succeed. That's where you think Gyökeres should be playing well, because that's sort of the moments that he had at Sporting where he excelled in. But in this moment, he didn't. And he got caught up by the Forest defender Murillo, who made the block after giving the ball away to Gyökeres. A massive chance, and he had to be putting that away. But it didn't actually matter because Aston Villa lost to Everton away from home. A poor result this was for Villa. There's actually a full review available on the channel now of this game, and Villa are struggling right now, I think, without the midfielders that they've got out. They had Kamara out, they had Onana out. John McGinn got injured during this game, and I think you could maybe give Villa a bit of a let-off considering how good they've been recently, but it is a concerning result for them, and it was a chance for them to go 4 points within Arsenal in the title race. But realistically for Villa, it's not about winning the league, I think, this season. It's more about trying to ensure they get the Champions League and maybe focusing on that Europa League. Looking at Manchester City will be devastated with that derby defeat. They were absolutely shocking in that game, really. And United was so much better than them across the board. And maybe you could say Dalot should have been sent off that challenge on Doku. But either way, City were nowhere near the quality that they needed to be for that game. Two players that really underperformed for Manchester City were Rico Lewis, which, I mean, is really disappointing to see. His defending on that Dorgu goal is terrible. He has to be doing way better, and overall he had a poor game. And Max Alline. Max Alline's a lot more understandable considering the fact that he is just a young player who's come back from a loan spell at Watford, and he's really only centre-half cover. And despite Arsenal losing, I think this just becomes so clear to me, Arsenal are going to win the league because Arsenal have dropped points against Forest, but they've still gained from the weekend because Villa and Manchester City lost in games which they probably should have won. Definitely Villa. There's no excuse, I think, for Villa to losing to Everton at home. And I think that's why Arsenal are going to go on and win this league because the competition around them is nowhere near good enough. And that's not Arsenal's fault. I'm not going to start this narrative that Arsenal don't deserve it because the teams around them aren't good enough. You can argue the fact that Arsenal aren't one of the best Premier League champions ever, which I think there's a fair debate for, but they are also one of the best sides in the world. And it's not their fault, the fact that Liverpool have dropped off. City still aren't good enough. Other sides haven't competed this season. Chelsea have got nowhere near them. And everyone said about the same thing about Arsenal in terms of they can't find ways to get over the line. Well, they've proven they can, and maybe it's not the nicest football to watch. Maybe it's more set-piece orientated, but it's still a way of winning the league. So this brings me on to the next thing I want to talk about, and it was the winner of the Manchester Derby and Manchester United. And they were brilliant, and it should have been 5 goals, 6 goals past Manchester City. And if Donnarumma wasn't in goal, if you had another keeper in goal, I really think that United won this game by sort of 4 or 5 goals. And they absolutely ripped through Manchester City on the counter-attack. Unfortunately for Manchester United, a couple of their goals were given as offside, rightfully were. There was that one goal, the Mason Mount one, which I still can't understand how that's been given offside, because for me, he looks completely on. So I guess the big question now is, why have Manchester United been able to do this? Why all of a sudden are they playing well? Well, I've always believed that the 3 at the back didn't suit Manchester United as much as the 4 at the back, but it's not the sole reason for why United are underperforming. Sure, it helps that Bruno Fernandes is in the 10, as he should be. I've always said this. Bruno Fernandes needs to be in the 10 for Manchester United, because when he's in the 8, he is effective, but he's nowhere near as effective. Players are usually more comfortable playing at a 4 at the back, especially in England, because this is how they've learnt. They've learnt to play in a 4 at the back, not a 5 at the back. But the main reason for me is a new manager comes in and United start to perform. This isn't an unusual trend, or this isn't surprising, I don't think, the fact that United is starting to play well. And I honestly refuse to buy this whole Michael Carrick has solved United, whatever, United are back, all this, because we see it so often. They are actually light switch FC. They have the ability to play better and perform for a new manager, and we've seen this in the past. And what I want to see from United is, first of all, a sustainable performances. And I don't mean until the end of the season. I mean and beyond. If they decide to keep Carrick, which I definitely wouldn't do because I don't think he's actually good enough to be United manager. He failed at Middlesbrough. Then I need to see consistent performances season after season to see proof that United are heading in the right direction, not just the odd great performance against a good side, because this isn't unheard of for Manchester United. United have the ability to get up for these big games, and I think these big games actually suit their players and the side, because United are a side that do better on the counter-attack. We saw that all in this game. United were really effective on the counter-attack, and under Ruben Amorim they were also effective on the counter-attack. And the main problem United were having was actually against the weaker sides in terms of breaking down those low blocks. City don't play in a low block, so they thrived because they play a suited counter-attacking system. Players like Bruno Fernandes, players like Brian Mbeumo, they thrive in a counter-attacking system. Most of the squad thrives in a quiet counter-attacking system where you can sit in a low block and then hit teams on the break. When you're playing against your Burnley, your Wolves, your Leeds, you can't do this, and that's why I think they failed to win those games. So that for me is the real challenge for Michael Carrick at Manchester United, is how does he do in those sort of games where they have to dominate the ball and beat those sort of sides? Because United so far this season have completely failed to do this, and I don't think that's a simple manager switch is going to solve that problem, because I think a lot of the players that United have right now are sort of not suited to breaking down low blocks. So for me, in terms of when United are looking at signing players, that's what they need to be looking at. Players that can help United break down a low block, not sides that will help United play on the counter-attack. If they look for a midfielder, it's got to be a midfielder that will help break down a low block, because that for me is still the major problem at Manchester United. It's not their ability to hit good sides on the counter-attack. And this brings me on to another side, which I think are failing with this exact same problem, and that is Newcastle United. Newcastle United this season, I think, are actually been quite good against the better sides. They can hit teams on the break, very similar to Manchester United, but whenever they have to play a side like Wolves, which they did this weekend, they struggle, and they struggle once again in a 0-0 draw. Nothing really of note, so I'm going to talk about apart from that. That's where I think Newcastle United's struggles lie. And that's going to be a test for Eddie Howe in terms of how can he adapt the side to break down low blocks as they become a better team. Is Eddie Howe going to be a problem in terms of that? Potentially, because he hasn't got a lot of experience with that. And for me, similar to United, whenever Newcastle sign players, they've got to have that in mind in terms of we don't want to be signing players that are good at counter-attacking. We need to be signing players that are good at breaking down low blocks. Because as Newcastle get better and better, more teams will sit in against them, because that's how football works. Where you get more defensive against the better sides. As much as breaking down low blocks is a problem for Newcastle, they're probably their biggest problem this season has been that away form. So then the next sort of European place game I want to talk about is Chelsea and Brentford. And it wasn't just Chelsea that are competing for Europe right now, it's also Brentford. Brentford, in fact, were above Chelsea in 5th place before this game. Chelsea are now above them after winning against Brentford. And Chelsea weren't excellent. I think a 2-0 definitely flatters Chelsea in this game. There were some big chances for Brentford. Kevin Schadter's decision-making wasn't good enough. And I think that is the problem with Schader. He's clearly a very talented player. He suits a counter-attacking system, but his decision-making could be better at times. And I think we saw an example of that in this game. Sanchez also deserves some massive credit for Chelsea in this game. Made 2 really good saves to keep them in this game and actually win the game for Chelsea. In terms of other sides sort of fighting for Europe, I'm going to talk about them later. You can make an argument that any side around to 15th in the table could finish in Europe by the end of the season, even 16th place. But what I want to go on to next is the relegation battle, where every side in the bottom 6 actually picked up a point this weekend at least. Out of those sides, you'd probably only say the bottom 4 were actually in a battle, and that is Wolves, Burnley, West Ham and Nottingham Forest. And it was a great win for West Ham this weekend over Spurs. And I mean, Spurs, you could almost say, are getting close to a relegation battle. If they keep a point... So I'm going to start off with Wolves, who got a good point against Newcastle. Wolves, I would still say, are definitely going down. I don't think they can really get themselves out of this position they are in. They had a really poor start, and it's very unlikely they are going to recover from here. I still definitely think they will go down. I don't know if they'll go down in 20th place. I think they might go into 19th place. And that's because I actually think Burnley may now finish in 20th place. They actually just got a really good point against Liverpool, but I'm just not convinced by Burnley as a side. And they were decent in that second half, but they still weren't great, and they deserved to probably lose that game. It was a good finish, though, from Marcus Edwards off his left foot to get the draw for Burnley. Nottingham Forest are only 5 points clear now of the drop zone, but it was a good point for them against Arsenal. They never really threatened Arsenal in terms of scoring a goal, but they were defensively solid, and to get a point against a side that's currently top of the league at home, you would definitely take that result. But the reason they're only 5 points clear now is because West Ham managed to win against Spurs. And I mean, that's a great 3 points for West Ham in a big rivalry. And West Ham were brilliant in that first half, and they probably deserve to actually be 2-0 up in this game. I still don't think they're a great side, West Ham, but they showed some fight in that game under Nuno, and then the last minute Callum Wilson got the goal for West Ham. For me, West Ham need to be desperate to keep hold of Callum Wilson. Not necessarily as a starter, but as a player you can bring on. Because he's a very good instinctive finisher. He always knows where to be in the box. And he's an absolute poacher. And I think he's the sort of player you actually want in a relegation scrap. And as I thought he's shown that performance, he will show fight. He just needs to be given minutes and opportunities to play in games, which I don't think West Ham have done enough for him so far. Graham Potter certainly did when he was West Ham manager, and I don't think Nuno's given nearly enough minutes to a player like Callum Wilson. So this brings me on to the next segment, which is about managers. There's been no movement of managers in the last week, but I've got 3 words for Spurs. Sack Thomas Frank. He's nowhere near good enough. And if they don't decide to get rid of him, it will blow my mind to a point where I'm starting to think it may be self-sabotage, not getting rid of Thomas Frank. And the fans must be so bored in that ground. Losing to West Ham, I mean, that's astonishing considering how bad West Ham have been. And Spurs have only got sort of one way of scoring, it feels like. A delivery from Pedro Porro from a set piece or from open play. And that's what happened again with Romero scoring to equalise for Spurs. That's all Spurs have. That's the whole plan, is get the ball into the box. That's the way Spurs attack. And actually, it was no different at Brentford. And he's actually just performing with Spurs how he performed with Brentford last season. It's the same football. He hasn't adapted to being at a bigger club, and he hasn't understood the fact that you've got to perform way better than this at Spurs than you've got to perform at Brentford. And look, I definitely think there are problems with the squad. I don't think it's rosy at Spurs. Spurs have got a brilliant side, but it's not as bad as how it is performing right now. And after that game, it's actually relieved a bit of pressure on Nuno. I think the situation is a bit different. I actually think Nuno's a really good coach for this level, and I think I would still try to stick by Nuno because I don't think it's going to improve with a new manager. And I still think that probably is West Ham's best bet. I understand maybe you get someone else and you maybe get a bit of a manager bounce, and maybe that is the way you go. But I don't think Nuno's a terrible manager. I just think the players that he's got are absolutely awful and nowhere near good enough for Premier League level. So then we're on to Arne Slot at Liverpool. And my stance on this as a Liverpool fan is I would not sack Slot till the end of the season. I don't think he was at fault for the draw to Burnley hugely, and Liverpool should have won that game. Liverpool should have done better. The players on the pitch need to perform better. Szoboszlai need to score his penalty, and I understand there's no excuses for drawing to a side like Burnley, but I don't think it was the manager. I think it's more the players in that specific performances. And look, Liverpool have been nowhere near good enough so far this season. We haven't put up nearly a big enough title fight for what was expected, considering we were the favourites to win the league. But I also think that for the club in the future, the best thing to do is back Arne Slot for the rest of the season and then make a decision on whether we should sack him or keep him. Because if you want to sack him, then there's better managers on offer at the end of the season usually, and I'm not convinced by the managers that Liverpool could bring in right now. I'm also not big fans of interims because I think it's sort of wasting a couple of months, because there's still a chance that Slot does turn this around. We saw last season he is a good manager. And finally, the manager that's had the most discussion around them in Oliver Glasner. Glasner announced he will be leaving Crystal Palace at the end of the season, and everyone knew this was coming. I think the reason he announced this, though, is because he's frustrated with the Crystal Palace board for selling Mark Gahey. But at the end of the day, Palace decided that they needed the 20 million, which I think is absolutely fair enough. But following the defeat to Sunderland, he went on a bit of a rant about sort of the Mark Gahey situation, not being happy about what's happening at the club, and basically leaving the club out to rent. And I think that's what he's trying to do here. And he actually just wants to get himself sacked, get the payout, and then he doesn't have to manage for 6 months and can prepare for whatever club he's got lined up. I think that is the tactic Oliver Glasner is doing. He doesn't want to be at Crystal Palace anymore. He feels like he's achieved what he can, which I think is probably true. But basically, he wants to leave with a payment, which is a tactic we've already seen from Ruben Amorim this season, where he basically called out the owners in a press conference and it worked. So I think Glasner was definitely trying that tactic again. But Crystal Palace are refusing to sack him and basically going to keep him for the rest of the season, which I think they're right to do. They don't need to be strong-armed by Glasner like this, and they probably don't want to sack him because that doesn't give them enough time to sort of think about the new manager they want to bring in the summer, and they probably feel that there's better manager candidates in the summer that they could bring in. What do I actually feel about what he's sort of saying? I do feel bad for him and Crystal Palace, but at the end of the day, football is unfortunately a food chain, and this is what happens because these smaller clubs like Palace can't compete with the big boys, and over time it will even itself out, and players would still rather go to Spurs, go to Manchester United over a club like Crystal Palace, and this isn't going to change overnight, and it's very unlikely this will ever change. So I don't really think it's a lack of ambition in terms of trying to keep hold of players. This is just how it works in football. I think where he'll be disappointed, where I can understand them, is maybe he didn't feel like he got backed enough when those players left. And I do agree with him. I think for the summer, he 100% should have been backed more. He needed a backup wing back for Daniel Munoz, and he didn't get this. So I can understand his frustration about not getting a wing back and not getting other squad depth. So then I've got the biggest winners of the weekend. There's actually quite a few. What I'd like to talk about is Everton. Everton was so impressive against Aston Villa. There's a full review for that game, so I'm just going to briefly talk about it. But defensively, they were incredible against a side that's been so good at home, and they deserve massive credit for this. James Garner was also brilliant in midfield. I think West Ham winning a local derby as well, considering how hard it's been for the Premier League this season. They got some enjoyment out of that game. Maybe that gives them some belief they can stay in the division. Somehow I'm also probably saying Arsenal, because despite drawing to Forest, they've actually profited off this weekend, and now they have extended the gap to 7 points. I mean, that's more evidence to suggest they've got enough in the tank to win this league, because the teams around them don't have enough quality. And then obviously Manchester United winning the Manchester derby, which I don't think anybody really expected, especially after the appointment of Michael Carrick. And even if you expect this, it's still a massive win in the Manchester derby for Manchester United. And they actually deserved to win that game. In fact, they battered City completely. And that brings me on to my biggest losers for the weekend. And I definitely think Manchester City should be in this. They were terrible against Manchester United. Then I have got Liverpool drawing to Burnley, and of course Spurs, which would be my biggest out of all of the sides. Spurs are a bit tragic, and they have lost against West Ham. And Thomas Frank should be sacked, as I've already said in the video. And they were nowhere near good enough in a game which means a lot to both fan bases. I've also got Newcastle United for drawing to Wolves away from home, and I've got Aston Villa for losing against Everton at home, despite all the injuries that Everton had for that game. So then I've got the next segment, which is referee controversy, where I'm going to talk about 3 referee decisions and my opinions on this. The first one I've got is Dalot against Doku, and that's 100% a red card. It's a terrible challenge, actually, and I can't believe he didn't get sent off. I don't care, it's a derby. That is a challenge that you cannot commit in any game of football, and it was an incredibly dangerous challenge, and people have been sent off in the Premier League recently for a lot less. The next one I've got is the handball by Ole Aina. That's 100% a handball by Ole Aina, and look, I don't want Arsenal to win the league particularly, but I can admit that it was 100% a handball by Ole Aina, and it should have been a penalty for Arsenal. And it was a massive mistake by him. I don't really understand what he's trying to do in that situation. And finally, I've got the dive, or it was given the penalty from Adley. In my opinion, he knows what he's doing in that situation, and I don't think there was enough evidence for VAR to overturn that decision. And I think these sort of decisions and these sort of mistakes show to me the fact that we don't need VAR in the game, because in my opinion, there's 3 decisions there, and I actually think they got all 3 wrong, despite VAR not existing. I'm not asking for everything to be 100% accurate, because that's the problem. It can't be, and that's why I just scrap it all together, because you're asking something to be so accurate when it actually can't be, and there's always human error, even when there is this sort of technology in the game. So then my final segment is going to be my team of the week, and this is going to be in a 4-3-3. Some players will be out of position for this team of the week, but I've just tried to find a way to squeeze them in. So in goal, I've got Sanchez. I thought he was excellent for Chelsea and he deserves to be in it. I think some other keepers you could talk about is Jordan Pickford. I thought he was very good for Everton. And potentially Donnarumma. Despite conceding 2 and conceding quite a few offside goals, he kept City in somewhat in that game. But anyway, at right back, I've got O'Brien. He played centre-half. He can play right back. And I wanted to just talk about him because I thought he was excellent for Everton. Then for the right centre-half, I've got Malik Chow, continues to perform for Newcastle. Left centre-half, I've got Lisandro Martinez. I thought he was very good. Left back, I've got James Justin, a good performance for Justin at Leeds United. So then into the midfield 3, and I've got James Garner, absolutely brilliant for Everton, I thought, against Aston Villa. Another player that was good in that game was actually Yuri Tielemans, but I haven't quite found a way to squeeze him in. I've got Enzo Lafay in this team of the week as well as Bruno Fernandes, absolutely brilliant against Manchester City. Then on the right wing, I've got Brian Mbeumo, played up front against City, but I've decided to shove him in on the right wing because up front I've got Robbie, really good for Sunderland in that game, and it was a great finish to win the game for Sunderland. And finally on the left wing I've got Patrick Dorgu in a makeshift position. He played really well in that game. Finally, for the manager, I've got Michael Carrick, first game in charge as interim for Manchester United, and he got 3 points against Manchester City. Let me know your thoughts on this Premier League roundup. Unfortunately, I couldn't do a championship roundup this week. What I'm going to do from now on is do a separate Premier League roundup and championship, but I didn't have time to do the championship one, but there will be a championship roundup coming up for the next lot of championship fixtures, which are coming up this week. And if you enjoy this, it would be great if you subscribe to the channel as well as the